Welcome to Public Health America, a weekly program produced by BronxNet in partnership with Mercy College. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. Here on Public Health America, we speak with experts from an array of specialties across the liberal arts and health professions to provide you with not only the best science, but practical tips to live a healthier life. We also celebrate what studies have long documented, namely the unparalleled value of a liberal arts college education by setting the stage to pursue a career of your choice, increase lifetime earnings, and engage in civil debate. Our experts will share decisions they made and support they received that helped them to beat the odds. By sharing one or two life lessons, their stories may provide you with the inspiration and method to realize your dreams. This is Public Health America. Welcome to Public Health America. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. Today, we're very fortunate to have with us Dr. Rachel Weissler, postdoctoral scholar in linguistics, psychology, and Black studies at the University of Oregon. Rachel, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. Pleasure to have you here. So, Rachel, I know you're doing some cutting-edge work on Black language and liberation. Tell us about your work.
Sure. So broadly, as a linguist, not everyone necessarily knows what a linguist does. So I am someone who is interested in language, but not necessarily just the language we learn in school. I'm interested in the language that we all use day to day, how we interact with each other, things that we learn naturally from being in communities with one another, and how language will vary and change depending on who we're around, generation-wise, age-wise, region, racially. We have so many various ways in which we are influenced and how we speak. Importantly, when I say I study Black language and liberation, I'm particularly interested in the ways that Black people speak in the United States, how Black folks have historically spoken and speak now, how Black people are really linguistic innovators in this space and then have language appropriated often. But at the same token, Black people are often judged based on how they speak. Many people are judged by how they speak, and I'll be happy to talk more about this. But broadly, I'm interested in how Black people speak, how they're perceived based on how they speak, and how we can get a clearer sense of who originated which ways of being and speaking for liberation for everyone, particularly Black people.
Fascinating. And I would imagine that there's so many ways in which that complex relationship or relationships could be examined. So for example, do you look at regional differences within the US, or what are give us kind of that was a great intro. Give us kind of a deeper dive of the variables you're looking at when trying to understand the influence of language and how it's perceived and its relationship to liberation, if that's a fair question.
Absolutely. So if we think about language, I mean, this is a broader, perhaps a separate question to say, what is language? What makes language different than a dialect? What makes a language different from a language variety? What makes English English, for example? And if we think about the world, there's a spectrum of world Englishes, right? The English that we're speaking in the United States broadly sounds different than the English that we'll hear in Australia, for example. Some people have said the difference between a language and a dialect is that a language is just a dialect with an army and a navy. A language is just a dialect with an army and a navy. And so what that means, or what we're trying to say with that, is that there's really nothing that separates a dialect from a language other than the people who decide what languages will have power and which ones won't. So this, for example, is why we can see why we even have English, for example, in the United States. If we think about colonialism, if we think about who came here, we can have a sense of why languages go certain places and why they get picked up and who gets to decide what is the language of instruction, the language of the law, the language that you get married in. In South Africa, for example, there are 12 national languages. The continent of Africa is the most linguistically diverse space in the whole world. But South Africa, the country, has 12 national languages, which means you can be tried in those languages, you can go to school in those languages. But the United States doesn't have any national language. If you look it up, the United States does not have a national language. English is just perceived as such, right? And the type of English, again, is a very particular kind. We like to call it standardized American English. I say standardized because it's perceived as such, because there is nothing actually standardizing it. And so I don't mean to get so far away from your question. I wanted to make sure to situate what we're thinking about here, because you asked what sort of variables will we be looking at. So if we're looking at Black English, African American English, I'm interested in all of the speech sounds, the syntactic structures, everything that composes language as it is.
So again, fascinating, and it seems exceedingly complex in a good way. So what are, okay, your areas, Black language and liberation. Let's talk about the liberation piece. You alluded to the idea that various forms of language, presumably English in the US, that those variations may have, I'm guessing here, different perceptions of power, and that relates to a person's ability to be liberated. Is that part of what you're looking at?
Yes, it's exactly that. So I really appreciate you bringing it up in that frame. So the types of studies that I do with my work, we call them matched guise studies. And what those are to say, okay, if we have one person that uses multiple different dialects to, let's say, call an apartment complex and ask if their apartment's available, for example, there are these studies that show us if someone is using their African American English voice, if they're using a standardized American English voice, if they're using a Latino English voice, for example, they get varied responses whether or not the apartment's available, their apartment's not available. Right. This is one example for access. Another example is thinking about the courtroom. There's plenty of these studies coming out right now looking at court reporters and court reporter accuracy. And we're seeing that Black people, when on the stand, are transcribed incorrectly. There are not linguists or African American English specialists in the room, and therefore people are being transcribed from what they're saying in court incorrectly, which can then affect the outcomes of a case. And so this is what I mean when I say Black language and liberation. We're interested in looking at how Black people are perceived, as you said, and then how people are treated based on that perception, and how linguistic knowledge can help us, again, liberate Black people.
Yeah, those are two. So now that really drove it home in an incredibly important way with those two examples: apartment access and let's call it courtroom ethics, legality, fairness, or the lack thereof, and that is immensely important. Let me ask. On either of those fronts, it seems to me that your work is critically important in relation to policy. Is there a policy arm to your work, or are you focusing more on the kind of science of it?
This is a great question. So policy is incredibly important with respect to this, and it could, again, change the way that people are treated according to the law. One of the biggest difficulties, though, with policy, as people might know, is being able to get people to make changes, getting people to be able to move away from ideologies. These linguistic ideologies we have about right and wrong ways to speak are deeply entrenched in our society. And until we're going to be able to push past those ideologies, we're going to have trouble being able to mix the linguistic science and evidence that we have with policymakers saying, okay, now that we know that Black people are being treated disproportionately, how do we make these changes? So we have had difficulty with this crossover, but there is some hope. Like I said, there are now papers that are coming out, research papers, looking at court transcription accuracy and the lack thereof. And now we have court reporters being trained in multiple varieties of English. If we even looked at a broader scale in the world, looking at ways to transcribe languages that don't have a written component, not every language has a written component as well. So how do we make sure that we are liberating those people as well? And so there are some efforts being made, and it is really encouraging.
That's great. So, Rachel, let me ask what I think might be a not politically correct question.
Sure.
That I don't think it's difficult for me to think of what an answer would be or a solution. So, here at Chestnut Hill College in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and then at Mercy College in Dobbs Ferry, the Bronx, in Manhattan, there are obviously very high proportions of first-generation college students, students of color, a wide array of linguistic styles, which is obviously a strength, of the college and certainly of Philadelphia and of New York City. It seems to me, look, the idea that your work demands that we educate the public and improve courtroom practice and improve access to apartments that are in a more equal way, that I get. That makes a lot of sense. But when we start talking about changing racist attitudes that are linked to linguistic patterns, then I get a little bit more anxious in terms of what it's going to take short-term and long-term, meaning that, we're all working in the same direction. But if I was working, say, and I am, with, say, hundreds of African-American men, Hispanic, Latinx men, and women, I can imagine we're collectively working as an institution to improve these things, but at the same time, do I work at the individual level and say, look, this is what you're up against? I could imagine an individual response to increasing the chances that you're going to get an apartment, that you're going to be treated more fairly in court. That individual response might not be fair, might not be right, but might get you the apartment. Is that a debate? Is anybody even discussing differences in approach, or is it just, this is the right thing to do, change society, that's our only strategy? Is that
this is a very good question. Great question. So what would I say to that? So I think what linguists have tried to talk about, besides it's the right thing to do, all languages are equal, right? This is a nice refrain, but as you said, we also have to have people go to school, there are paths towards success. And so we like to think about an additive model rather than a subtractive model. So being able to say, look, we all have these different ways of speaking. We speak this way at home. We speak this way with our friends. We speak this way with our families. We speak this way with our teachers. Why can't we have an added model where we're not admonishing or treating someone badly because of how they speak in certain and particular ways, but instead say, okay, we have the language of school rather than the right language. So being conscientious about all of these being able to live together. You bring up another point that might be too much for this segment in this time, but I will just say that when we think about how people are treated, people will be treated on site based on how they look, regardless of the words that come out of their mouth. And so that's another important piece for us to think about too, that we do need to be pinpointing the racist ideologies, because studies tell us that people will react to how people sound when it's not even language that's actually in the speech stream. People are just judging people on how they look, which is why it's really important that we do come at this particularly with an ideologies frame.
Yep. Really important stuff, fascinating work, incredibly important, particularly now. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Dr. Weissler will tell us a little bit about her personal life story, her undergraduate experience, and how that was formative in providing her the opportunity to pursue this incredibly important topic and career. This is Public Health America. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. We'll be right back. welcome back to Public Health America. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. So, Rachel, in this part of the segment, I always start with the same question. Where were you born, and what were some of your formative experiences?
Yeah, great. So I grew up in Southern California to a Black mom and a white dad. And so growing up in a biracial household in a predominantly white environment was a interesting and very formative time in my life, especially because the only Black person I saw growing up was my mom. Um, and I talked a bit, of course, about my interest in linguistics, and a lot of them came from those formative years. Hearing my mom speak one way, but then when I would speak maybe that way, she would tell me, "Don't talk that way. You have to speak intelligently. You have to not sound ignorant." And at the same time, when I would go home to South Jersey, Beverly, New Jersey, which is where my mom's side of the family is and where I eventually moved to go to high school, that's where I was able to be with everyone on the Black side of my family and seeing again the innovation and the knowledge and the wonder and the amazingness that is Black language, particularly South Jersey Black language. But I have, again, these memories of just hearing all of these different Englishes around me that made me wonder, again, thinking about how can Black people be liberated in how we speak. And so, like I said, I was in California for the formative years of my life with both parents. My parents got divorced. My mom moved back to New Jersey, and I went with her. And then I stayed on the East Coast after high school and ended up going to Bryn Mawr College, which is a historically women's college outside of Philadelphia on the main line. That was an extremely formative experience for me, particularly because I never expected to go to a school that was so wonderful and really changed the trajectory of my life. I really didn't do quite well in school from K through 12. I didn't get good grades. I didn't really think much about college. I didn't really know what my future was or what I really wanted to do. But I'm grateful that I have had consistently throughout my life mentors who have seen me, seen my abilities beyond maybe traditional ones. Teachers that saw my creativity and drive and gave me the tools to go and try something like going to a historically women's college. And I'll be happy to talk more about that. But mentors are everything and why I am where I am today.
Yeah, that's great. That's a wonderful story. Bryn Mawr, obviously a great college. Tell what was your major?
Yeah, so I majored in linguistics and minored in political science. Again, didn't go to college to do that, really didn't know what I wanted to study. I know I was interested in language-based differences. I really didn't know what that meant. I thought maybe I'd be a speech pathologist, but didn't know how to get there. But took a linguistics class, an intro class to just take it. And the professor came to me afterward and said, "You ask really good questions and you should come to my office and maybe we could talk about the kind of work that I do." And she ended up bringing me on as a research assistant, which again, no experience, no knowledge about linguistics before this. But again, this woman, this is Dr. Brooke Lillyhagen. I always like to name her because she changed the trajectory of my life. I never would have been here if it hadn't been for her taking me in early, the first year of my undergraduate experience, and showed me the world of research. And so, yeah, I'm super indebted to Brooke.
That's fantastic. So just to highlight a couple of points you've made already that I think are so important for our audience. One is that, when you were, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but in middle school and high school, you did it well, okay, but not like the best grades. You weren't really thinking every moment about what is my future and should I go to college. But then you did, and it was transformative. And a critical part of that was having one or more mentors, faculty who really looked after you, saw your talent, believed in your talent, and helped you realize your talent. One other key point I want to stress is that when you went, and this is not unusual, you didn't know exactly what you wanted to do. You might have had broad stroke ideas, but you were kind of, college itself was a journey of self-awareness that you were able to, find something you were very interested in. Fantastic. Tell us, and then one more, tell us a little bit about your research experience or any experiential learning opportunities and the significance of that to your overall education.
Yes. So again, like I said, felt so lucky to have the opportunity to get to in the research space from the beginning of my college career. But this is bare bones. I'm talking about the professor would give me her slides, her PowerPoint slides, and I would need to be moving things around, right? Or she would be like, go to the library and ask them for these books. And I remember I still have the library card that she gave me as a research assistant. It was a great a title with my name on it, research assistant for Hagen, and I could go to the library and get the books. Again, things that are all part of the research process that are pretty, like I look back and think, okay, very simple. But as a first year in college, I knew nothing of all the pieces that it takes to bring a research program to bear. So it went from that to then being able to do language analysis through later years in my career. And importantly, during maybe my sophomore, junior year, Brooke said, I don't know if you've ever thought about a PhD. I was like, no, I don't even know what that really entails. It took me a long time, probably until I got to graduate school, to really know what that means. But she said, you like doing research, you like to think about questions that can make the world better and different. You should try to get a PhD. And she told me to apply for the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship, which is a program that helps people of color make their way through to graduate school in order to diversify the professoriate. And they also work with Institute for Recruitment of Teachers, which is another program that works to help diversify the professoriate by showing undergraduate students of color the ropes. Here is what graduate school is about. Here's what the academy is about. Things that your parents are probably not talking to you about and that I obviously had not been talked to you about. And so many programs out here to really help us. And now I get to work with those programs on the other side now that I have my doctorate, and it's just wonderful.
Fantastic. So you go to Bryn Mawr, you get your undergraduate degree. What was the next step?
Yes. So during that time, and I'll be completely, frank with you, that's when I was told by my mentors at the time that I should try to apply for a PhD. Again, did not even know really what that would entail. But what I did learn is that when you go to graduate school for a PhD, most times they are funded, meaning that they'll pay for the tuition, pay you a stipend for doing the labor that is doing this research work, pay for your medical insurance and your dental insurance. I looked at this and thought, oh, well, I have to go to graduate school. Because I'm going to be supported in all these ways, right? I had no clue, all of the benefits. And I think that's something so important is access and knowledge about what people have the potential and ability to do. And if there are other people around you that haven't done those types of things, you're not going to know that you could go spend 5-6 years researching a particular field that is of interest to you and be paid to do that and get a higher a degree for that. So again, like I said, that was a journey, like learning that I could even do that. And now in my current role, it's important for me to mentor students and let them know about these possibilities, that they are not limited in their career paths and options. And so again, I bring it back to mentors being everything and giving me access. And so, yes, I actually went directly to graduate school from undergrad. I applied to 11 schools. I got into 2, which again, this is a whole other topic about access. You might only apply to 5 and not get into any and not think you're good enough when you don't know on the other side, the faculty member you wanted to work with is going to go on leave, or they don't actually have any more funding for more students, but it has nothing to do with your capabilities. All of this stuff happening behind the scenes that students wouldn't know. But luckily, because I had all these different supports, I was able to successfully apply to schools, get into a great school, University of Michigan, and then be able to complete my PhD last year.
That's great. What a great story. You've got so much fabulous content, but certainly the idea of applying to 11, getting into 2, University of Michigan, obviously one of the premier universities in the country, if not the world. So the idea that, yes, you didn't get into every place, but you hung in there, you applied to what is a completely normal number of schools, and then you had an option of where to go. A lot of folks wouldn't know that necessarily. And then you lay out all of the things that you learned along the way, not just in terms of the content of your degrees, but the opportunities that you have when you go to grad school, being fully funded, having health insurance, et cetera. It may sound trivial, but quite frankly, it isn't. It's incredibly important, not to mention the fact that if you get an undergraduate degree compared to high school, grad, you're going to make $1 to $2 million more over the course of your lifetime. Every degree that you go up higher, it's 2 million, it's 3 million, it's 4 million. It's not just about the money, it's about access to healthcare. It's about just quality of life, the ability to take care of your family. So a lot of what interacting or educating, mentoring, the kinds of, first generation college students that go to Chestnut Hill College, that go to Mercy College, is mentoring exactly the kind of mentoring that you received. Let me ask you this. So you went to University of Michigan, you get your doctorate, and you're finishing up a postdoctoral fellowship now, is that correct?
Yes. And so for anyone that might not know what a postdoc is, that means that I finished my PhD, and the next step will be to be an assistant professor at the University of Oregon. But right before that, I am taking a little bit more time to get some extra training. So I'm currently working on applying for grants, which is something I didn't necessarily focus on during my PhD time. And I'm teaching a little bit, which isn't always a part of a postdoc, but I'm very passionate about teaching, mentoring. And so I got the opportunity to teach as well during my postdoctoral time. So it's been a really wonderful opportunity to teach a bit, research a lot, and learn more skills.
That's great. So Rachel, if you were to give one piece of advice to folks in our audience about, how to get to and succeed in undergraduate school, in college, what would that be?
Yes. Okay. I have a good one, I think. If you knew everything already, you'd already have the degree. People are there to help you, and you should reach out and ask for help. I think it's really important that we know that people are there and want to help us. Faculty are sitting in office hours dedicated to you, waiting, wanting to help out. But I think a lot of times students, I know I personally could get really overwhelmed and scared and didn't want to look stupid or like I don't know what I'm talking about. I learned really quickly that if I wanted to succeed in any level of my education, I needed to ask a lot of questions. I needed clarity. I needed to make sure that I can finish the thing that they need me to complete. Asking questions all the time and getting clarity and being communicative are, I think, some of the most important pieces that allowed me to be successful in my career. So I would encourage all of you to know that asking questions is a strength, communicating is a strength, and it will get you where you need to go. And you can do this.
That's great. What a fabulous segment. Thank you so much. I want to thank Dr. Rachel Weissler at the University of Oregon for her wonderful story. I want to thank our viewers for tuning in. This is Public Health America. I'm your host, Dr. William Latimer. Take care. See you next time.